Now, Marcus, some of this is coming off of a website that you didn't give me all this information, so if there's something wrong here, you tell me. He was born in Fresno to a European-American father who was employed as a mechanical engineer, and to a Mexican-American mother employed as an information technology professional. He was raised in Fresno. He graduated from Edison High School in 1985 and continued his education as a Dean Scholar at the University of Southern California, USC, in Los Angeles. He graduated magna cum laude in 1999 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Urban and Regional Planning. The following year, he became an employee of the state of California in Caltrans, where he remains. Are you still an employee there? Marcus worked as a liaison. I was hoping he'd be here so I could ask a little bit more about this. Maybe he'll talk about it a little bit. Liaison between the state of California government and the federal government for over 10 years, where he developed a personal understanding of this federal and state relationship. During this time, he also had the opportunity to work on the goods movement efficiency studies, looking at how the international freight system operates, and especially California's role in the world economy. He's traveled to several nations and many of the states, comparing views on international trade. This is a kind of a rare program. I didn't know about Marcus before, and there was all of a sudden an email that I got about asking if he could come and speak. And so he has a message that he really wants to bring to us, and I'm pleased that we have decided to have him come and that he has also agreed to come. Marcus, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you all for letting me come out. I really appreciate the opportunity. I just published a book called California's Next Century 2.0. You all should have flyers in front of you. At the bottom it should say Marcus Ruiz Evans and California's Next Century 2.0. My name is Marcus Ruiz Evans and the book is California's Next Century 2.0. If you type in either of those terms, Google, Bing, Yahoo, pages of book reviews, articles, and I just had a review in the LA Daily News, just came out. The rest of that flyer is information on an initiative movement. I've given this speech at 30 California cities so far. Some of the people have seen this speech and are already moving to form a nonprofit organization for the explicit purpose of putting an initiative in the ballot in the near future that would specifically direct the California State Legislature to look at this plan that will get us out of this recession. So if you would like more information, there's a sign-up sheet there, or you can email me and be part of the movement. But I do want to say that everything I'm about to talk about and everything that can happen will never happen without your support, because this is a plan that cannot happen unless the mass people of California make it so. So real quick, here's the outline of the speech. I'm going to give a series of radical claims, things that can happen if you follow the plan to get California out of the recession. They will seem too good to be true, but I am saying that they can all happen, and at the same time, if you make the radical shift as proposed in California's Next Century 2.0. I will then explain how this can be. That will explain the title of the book, and then I'm going to bring it back around and say what specifically it means to you as individuals. And here's a hint, it has something to do with your pocketbooks. And then I'll turn it over to questions and answers. So first, the radical claims. Can I take this out, or is it? Yeah. Okay. I'd like to move a little bit. All right, there you go. Okay, so the things that can happen all at the same time and in the next couple of years. Number one, half of your taxes gone. Number two, half of the bureaucracy of running a business in California removed. Originally, I was saying that the debt would be paid off, but that appears to have already happened. However, a plan to get California out of this recession, and I mean within the year's time frame, and to effectively make it recession-proof for the next 100 years. Yes. 100,000 new blue-collar jobs, 450,000 new white-collar jobs, a metric jump in the quality and capacity of every elected official and every appointed government official like you've never seen before, plus a return to local control to the city and county levels like you haven't seen since the 1960s, and a return to the infrastructure building age when they used to call California the Golden State, like in the 1960s, where our roads, bridges, dams, seaports, airports, levees, and basic schools and government buildings jumped from worst in all of America to best in the entire world. Here's how it's possible. And yes, none of this can happen right now with the current system. But if we do the shift, it all can happen and at the same time, and with only a few years. Quick history lesson, and this explains how you can have this. So in the next 20 to 40 years, there's going to be new superpowers. Countries that have the raw money and influence of America today. Going to happen, nothing's going to stop this. Their names will be India, China, Russia, Brazil, Europe and America, and possibly a Southeast Asian collective known as ASEAN, ASEAN. Now, since World War II, America got to be the main champion of peace and progress, because the other option was the USSR. You had one version of capitalism and democracy with flaws, and then you had communism, control over everybody's life, control over the economy. And that meant that a lot of countries would side with the American model. But something happened in the late 1980s, early 90s. America became the victim of its own success. It won the Cold War. And now everybody realizes that capitalism and some form of democracy is the way to go. But they have different ideas on what that looks like. China is a capitalist country, and China has some democracy at the very local level. It does not look and act like America, but it is a capitalist, democratic country that other nations are now looking at. So what happens in the 20 to 40 years in the near future when America is no longer the only option? It's one of 7 options, each with their own individual way of pursuing democracy and capitalism. Do we know for a fact that the world will choose the American model like it did after World War II? Or will they not? Well, a couple things are happening. Foreign policy scholars are saying that the period that we're going into the next 20 years most closely resembles a previous period in history, 1880 to 1910, otherwise known as the lead up to World War I and World War II. Here's why. During that time, most of the world was owned by Europe. But then there were new European countries who hadn't gotten their piece of the pie. They hadn't made their colonies. Their economy wasn't as fully developed. And they started rising up. And then they wanted their colonies and their pieces of the economy, and their names were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And they did go out and conquer their piece of the world, and they interconnected into the existing British and French national global economy. And things worked out for a while. But then one day it wasn't good enough. And Germany walked out of the League of Nations. Italy walked out of the League of Nations, and Japan walked out of the League of Nations, and you know the rest of the story. So here's how that resembles what's happening right now. China is going to less UN meetings, less IMF meetings, G20, G8, whatever you want to call it. And they're making their own UN. It's called the Shanghai Cooperation Council. They're inviting other countries that are near China to join their club. Looks just like the UN, and guess what? Only people they like to get to join. And America is specifically forbidden from ever joining this club. Brazil has one of its own. Who's ever heard of Mercosur? Exact same thing. India has one. Russia has one. And even Europe's toying around with the idea. So what happens when these countries continue their move away from the global peace centers since World War II that have kept order for almost the last century, and they begin to make their own poles and spheres of influence for themselves? Most of these nations feel that America got to be the global influence all over the world. And now they want to be like America in their section of the world. They think that America and Europe own the UN and the IMF, And so they don't see those institutions as fair, and as they get more money and more power, they're making their own world institutions. And that is exactly what happened 1880 to 1910. Different nations, exact same concept. You guys are well established, you say this is the order of the game, I don't want to play your game. And I have as much money and power as you. So I'm going to make my own rules, and we're going to do it the way I see fit. That's how they're moving. And there's something to that. There has never been an over-secretary or general secretary of the UN or the IMF who has not been a European or an American in 70 years. So when you try telling Chinese, Indians, Russians, and Brazilians, oh, it's about you, they don't buy it. You had 70 years to show it's about them. You didn't. They're moving on. So, what happens in a world where one center pulls away and now you start to have multiple centers? And as they get more power, they begin to make more of an all center. Well, we already saw a way this can go. It was called World War I and World War II. Now, I'm not saying that World War III is going to happen, but I am saying that the patterns are already being talked about by foreign policy experts as extremely similar. Here's how California comes into that. Most of the peace that has existed for the last 200 years, most of the peace negotiations, most of the deals between corporations and between governments was done in a little city called Geneva, Switzerland. Now, Geneva has a bad reputation because of banking in World War II, but the majority of their economy has always been diplomatic negotiation services. About 200 years ago, the Swiss went to Europe, and they said, we're part German, French, Italian, and Romansh. We need to be your diplomatic negotiation center because we speak all of your languages, we know your culture, and we are literally living physical proof of all of you getting along together. Well, the Europeans bought that argument. And so for the last 200 years, if you type in Geneva, Switzerland again on any internet search engine, you will see a list of everything. The Geneva Conventions, the Red Cross, the first agreements on telephony, internet, shipping, etc. All designed in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, yes, a lot was done at the UN, but Geneva's been the place up until relatively recently. However, in the last 2 years, the mayor of Geneva and the government of Switzerland have issued their own report saying they can no longer be the diplomatic negotiation center for the world. The world's too different. Geneva was a great peace center when most of the world was owned by Europe. Now Europe will only be one superpower. We need a new Geneva, Switzerland. One that has the domestic populations of all of the new superpowers. Americans, Europeans, Brazilians, Russians, Indians, Chinese, and Southeast Asians. I look around the world, and the only place that has the domestic demographic population for the new superpowers that will be rising in the next century, like Switzerland did in the last century, and that's right here in California. No land, place, people, area, anywhere on the planet comes remotely close to having the superpower populations, all of them together, and having had lived together. You can immigrate whoever you want. And if you've only done it in the first couple of years, that doesn't prove anything. Type in Australia, immigration. You can see how well it's working out there. They have riots. We've done this for 100 years. Nobody comes close to the number of superpower nations that we have as Californians, and nobody comes close to the length of time that we've actually proven this concept. We've always talked about how our diversity is something that we deal with. What I'm saying is that we make it the key point of our economy and become fabulously wealthy for the next century with it. That we do not view it as something that we deal with, that we view it as our key asset of our entire population. Your Californianess, your understanding of diversity, your recognition that there is a large world out there and there are other cultures. Other states in this country don't get that. The average U.S. state, 5% linked to the global economy. California, about 45%. That's just a stat to show what you all know. This is an incredibly diverse place, and you are linked in to the world economy and the world cultures like nowhere else. So what I'm saying is you use what you are and you make yourself rich and get out of this recession. Switzerland has never had a recession. Switzerland has the lowest unemployment in the world today. Switzerland has had the highest living standard in the world for the last 200 years, and Switzerland has had the richest economy in the entire planet for the last century. That's not an accident. That's because they made themselves the diplomatic negotiation center of the world. When times are bad, people still have to talk. They still have to negotiate. Business contracts still have to be signed. So they have effectively a recession-proof economy. And they're giving it up. They're saying they can't do it anymore. They don't have Chinese, Indians, Brazilians, Americans, and Southeast Asians in there. We do. So here's the stark options. A, make yourselves super wealthy, get out of this recession, and make sure that your kids and your grandkids will never face a recession like you're living through right now, ever. Or, let the world order continue to disintegrate and see if World War III happens. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I have had endorsements from James O. Goldsboro, who's a foreign policy scholar. There's an LA Daily News article, 4 different independent California think tanks, the Milken Institute, USC Foreign Policy School, Claremont Institute, and the Independent Institute are looking into this, and 20 California professors. Plus, don't take my word for anything. There's 250 citations in the book. It's all documented. None of this is my opinion. I always cite someone else with more credibility. Check it out. I'm going to turn the camera off real quick, and then I'm going to explain what it means to you, and then I'll take questions. So just one second.